Welcome to the gallery. Thanks for coming out. I'm Dana Wiley, and I just want to say thanks for coming out to this exhibition, Movement in Space, Works on Paper, featuring the artists Emilio Maldonado, Elizabeth Mead, Kevin Pomerleau, and Holly Wong. We are really proud to have these four exciting artists here and to present them to the Dayton community. So you'll have to forgive me. Normally I don't do these introductions. Normally I have Gary, my business partner, do that. But he is in Hawaii this week. So that's how that goes. But we'll do our best, and I'm really just so envious. For those who don't know anything about our gallery, we're an emerging gallery here in Dayton. We've been open since 2018. We're really excited to have the artwork in the space here at Front Street. We love exhibiting both local and non-local artists. And we try to design these shows to create an experience that hopefully will facilitate an interaction between the viewer and the artist. So we just feel like art is a communication, and we just want to provide a space for the community to experience art through these types of events: art talks, workshops, lectures, panel discussions. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the exhibition here. I was really intrigued and amazed at the talent that each of these artists possess, and I just feel like their series is relevant in terms of exploration and subject matter, and certainly in their execution. Some of the artists, their work in their medium to explore their narrative through the use of natural light that creates different forms and spaces that vary. Some of the artists use dynamic movement of line that highlights healing energy and vitality. And other artists here use space as a way to express emotions of vulnerability, anger, fear, love. But all of these artists have chosen paper as their delivery method in how they choose to explore their themes through the use of movement in space. So now I just want to introduce the moderator for this event. Peter Benkendorf is a community catalyst and founder of the Collaboratory here in Dayton. It's a civic innovation lab. Peter came to us in January of 2009, bringing with him Blue Sky Project, an international artist residency and youth collaborative that he founded and co-created in 2004 outside of Chicago. Peter continues to be active in the Dayton community and the artist community, advocating for the local art scene, collaborating with local artists and galleries, and hosting exhibitions at both the Collaboratory and the Arts Collaboratory space. Peter is responsible for Dayton Porch Fest and bringing Eat Nosh to Dayton, which is a new initiative that organizes a monthly community dinner at different migrant-owned restaurants. So please help me welcome Peter. Thanks, Peter. Really appreciate it. So I'll hand it all over to you.
Dana, great. Dana, thank you very much. It's great to be in your gallery space virtually, and I always enjoy being in the space physically. Welcome to our guests, and welcome to our four artists. I really have enjoyed the show and have spent a lot of time in the gallery with your work, and it's all very different. And so I think that's going to be an exciting part of our conversation, to give you a chance to share a little bit about your backgrounds, and then also talk about the work in the show. So I think this is going to be for those in attendance with us, but those hopefully get a chance to watch this off of social media. I'm really looking forward to an exciting hour and giving people a chance to hear a little bit about your backgrounds and the work in the show. What I'd like to do is kind of take this into 2 rounds of questioning and sort of go around the room initially and have each of you talk a little bit about your backgrounds, and then we'll go around a second time and have you get a little bit more into the work in the show. Because I haven't gotten a chance to talk to you about a month ago, the last time we tried this, it was, it's clear to me that your past is certainly informs your current work. And so giving you all a chance to share that, I think it's going to be insightful and of interest to our listeners. So these are kind of multiple questions, but I'll put them all out there, and I'll give everybody a few minutes to kind of take a whack at it. But the first round of questions, tell us a little bit about the arc of your career as an artist. So here are the three questions. What was your first memory of making art? When did you know you wanted to be an artist? And what are some of the influences, artists, writers, thinkers, others? Who are some of the influences that you think about in making your work? So within that context, or however you want to take this this kind of question, Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. Hope those weren't too many questions. It's really kind of a very free form, but tell us a little bit about who you are as an artist and how you got to where you are today.
Well, when I was very small, my father had a custom furniture shop, and he would build the pieces in the back, and he would let me kind of work back there with him. So I think that was kind of the first bit of it. And then in high school, I had this amazing teacher named Louis Zendry, who was a painter. And in his office, he had this copy of a Vermeer painting that he had done that, were it not on foam rubber and had been framed, you would have thought it was Vermeer. It was absolutely exquisite. And he sort of planted the early seeds that this was a visual thing, but it was also a thing that you thought about and that had the power to convey information on another level. So I think that's sort of like my earliest memories. I went to Philadelphia College of Art as an undergrad. Following that, I worked as a studio assistant for a sculptor in Connecticut named Phil Grousman. And then from there, I went on into my graduate work at Southern Methodist University. As far as influences, it's interesting because for me, the first influences always come from more what I read, and then it's sort of referring back to different artists. So I think maybe the first really important the first really important piece of reading was by Martin Heidegger, and it was called Building, Dwelling, and Thinking. And in it, there's this passage where he's talking about the two banks of a river and how they're just continuous. They just keep going on until you erect a bridge, and then suddenly this thing that's continuous stops and becomes a place. And that really resonated for me on several levels, and has kind of stayed with me for way more years than I want to admit right now. And then I think recently I've been reading a lot of Stefan Mallarmé. I actually created a piece from his poem, A Roll of the Dice, because so he was really interested in the white space of the page and kind of all the stuff that wasn't there in addition to the words and the language of it, and the certain physicality of the book. And so I was invited to do a piece in London and was scheduled to leave just 3 days before we went into quarantine. We went into total lockdown, and I canceled my flight in the nick of time. Otherwise, I think I'd probably still be in London, which wouldn't be a bad thing. But anyway, I was scheduled to do a piece over there from that poem. But I think that's kind of the artists that really interest me are people whose work has like nothing to do with what my work looks like or does. But Henri Sala, I think the installations he creates and the way that he uses the architecture and responds to the architecture, in a given space, it certainly does have a kind of relationship to what I do. Tacita Dean, Anne Truitt, and Giacometti has always been back there, never to leave. So I don't know if I answered that fully, or is that okay?
It's interesting, and lots of references to 3 dimensions. So you then translate that back into works on how you translate back to works on paper. So it's obviously it's not always the obvious. So no, great. Thanks for taking the first shot at this. Emilio, tell us a little bit about the arc of your career as an artist, your first memories. When did you know you wanted to be an artist? Who are some of your influences, and anything else you want to share that you think is going to be of interest to folks listening in? You're muted.
There you go. I studied first in Dominican Republic in school called Altos de Chabón, Fine Arts and Illustration. And later in Puerto Rico, I went to Escuela de Artes Plásticas in San Juan, Puerto Rico, for my bachelor's. And then I did an MFA on SCAD in Savannah, Georgia. As far as my earliest memories were me trying to just draw cartoons, but I didn't think of art as a serious thing. I was always like a science math kid, interested in mechanics and anything that could blow up or fall or break or not. And I used to copy my sister drawing. I would see her drawing and I would draw, but that was all my interest. And later it became a tool for me to express. I like to write. And then as part of my writing, sometimes I feel that like words are not enough, and start using as a teenager, just like illustrating and doing these things. But I still didn't want to be an artist. People would always refer like, oh, you're going to be an artist. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not. I'm going to be an engineer, because I wasn't interested. And I still say that I arrived to art school as an accident. It was just like life circumstances. I ended up being in art school, changing majors, and it became something that at some point helped me in a tough situation, emotional, and that created a question. That's the first time that I thought of myself doing something within the arts that I was interested in, but not necessarily. I've never, even today, I don't have that thing like I want to be an artist. Like now I want to make an art career, and I want to make like really go in projects that express the way that I feel about things, and explore ideas. And the arts, I find that are still one of the best fields, because it allows for the absurd to happen. And but in terms of influences, I could start mentioning artists, but I get influences by situations. I get influences by things that I cannot answer. The first time that I did something that was art, that first piece, I was in a very, very low emotional point in my life, and all my family turmoil and all the things that I had, I was trying to commit suicide. And what I did is that I made one thing to leave as a testament. Uh, and when I brought it to class next day, people started applauding for the first time ever. I was just doing okay in school. But that is the thing that changed everything. Because I'm like, I have to figure out why. And I started doing these series of pieces that were basically insulting everyone. And that brought me praise. And it was like odd when I tried to fail purposefully, is when I started having any kind of success. And I still, that's what I try to do. Every time that I try to do a piece, I'm trying to words. And they're the words in an elegant way now, more because I tried to like the making of the piece be a thing. I've always been a crafter since I was a kid. Uh, and so I am an artist almost by accident. I am just trying to express and to think, and art is a thing that has impacted my life on many ways. So I just stick with it, and hopefully it keeps going. But in terms of influence, is walking on the street and seeing a person and their life situation, or having a conversation and not understanding, having like second ideas about how things happen, not being able to change anything, the sense of powerlessness. So that's why the absurd is so enticing, because art has both the power to change, but also is totally useless. And that I've reflected even on the choice of my materials. And then there is a current series, which is just an exploration of not being able to go out and see that our life situation had turned into the condition of life. And it's just like that pondering. I read a lot about I read everything about everything. So I was like part of a theosophical society. So there's a lot of the way that I think that is influenced by just the exploration of different ways of thinking, and trying to drive the idea as far as it can based on what you can, what you have in you. I think that's it.
Oh, thanks for sharing that. That's really an honest reflection and really very insightful when you take a look at your at the work you're producing. So thanks for that, Emilio. Holly, tell us everybody a little bit about the arc of your career. What were your first memories of making art? When did you know you wanted to become an artist? Who are some of your influences, and whatever else you feel like going to be of interest to folks?
Sure. I grew up in a Roman Catholic family, and we had a family Bible that had a lot of illustrations in it. Probably many people that have grown up in Catholic families remember the family Bible with all the pictures in it. And my first drawings were basically tracings over the pictures. And I did a lot of drawing in the Bible, which wasn't very appreciated, but it did encourage me. And as a kid, I drew a lot. As many children do. Florida at the time had an arts magnet school. So I had very early education in fine art, and I was very lucky. And it continued throughout high school. I definitely felt like I wanted to make art as a life choice, as a pathway. I think some of my earliest influences certainly were the Mexican muralists. There was an incredible Latin American art scene in Miami at the time and continues to be. And at that point, I think my first, of course, I loved Orozco and Siqueiros, but started to learn about the Latin American surrealists and the writings of Gabriela Garcia Marquez, and started to love this notion of magical realism, and started to look at the work of Remedios Varos, Leonora Carrington, and that continued throughout my schooling. I did get involved with fiber art because I had a friend in school whose mother owned a quilt store. And I certainly developed a real love affair with fabric. My mother was not a professional seamstress, but she could make virtually anything without a pattern. And I remembered a lot of hours spent with her. She would sew and I would help trace. I would draw what she would make her own patterns, but I would help draw them. So it was kind of like I lived in two worlds. I had a love of fabric and fiber, which has always had a sort of very strong firewall in a lot of art schools. And then I was also a painter and a sculptor. And I think as I grew older, I think things certainly merged for me in my work. And now I'm not afraid to let the patterns just sort of be what it is in my work. I think at this point in my life, I'm way too old to not be who I am. So I might as well just be what I am.
No, that's great. I mean, you can see some of your work behind you. I mean, to see the kind of the blending, and it has a very fiber feel, some of the work and the layering, obviously. And no, it's again, it's interesting to see as you hear the story how all of you have ended up kind of doing the kind of work where you're at today. So Kevin, we'll throw it over to you, and then we'll start talking about the work that you have in the show. Tell us a little bit about the arc of your career. What are some of your earlier memories? When did you first think about becoming an artist, and what are some of your influences? Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah. I guess I became interested in the arts, as early as like elementary school, being inspired by my art teachers, similarly, as I'm sure most of you said you have been. And I remember, my family was mostly kind of working class or in the medical field. And so like the jobs that they were used to people getting were kind of rational in a weird way. Not that art jobs aren't rational, but they're a little bit trickier to come by. So I remember like going to community college and being like, I really like the arts, but my mom being like, yeah, but what about, occupational therapy? And I just remember being like, no, that's not my thing. And so, but really kind of like forcing myself into this to align with this thing. And then just working my way throughout college and staying kind of in my local hometown area. I attended the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And I'm a printmaker currently, and got my first taste of printmaking in a community college setting where I was working in pretty toxic environments without ventilation and whatnot. And then getting to, university where they had a little bit more, but were still a little bit more to offer in terms of what they could do with the products that they were using in the ventilation and money, essentially. But they were still resorting to more toxic practices. Then I graduated and I got a studio with some people I had met on Craigslist who were fiber artists who had just moved back to Western Massachusetts from Boston, which is about an hour and a half away. And just knew that I really needed to kind of align myself with the printmaking community again. And there was a communal printmaking studio up the street, and I started to intern there, and I ended up building out their screen printing facilities and just really developing my processes in printmaking that I currently do now, which is etching. In my college career, I accidentally took a topic in art history course with this Professor Walter Denny, who I believe curates a lot of the Islamic art and textile sections at the Met. And he taught this course randomly, and I needed a couple of credits in my schedule. And so I took it, and I really fell in love with the imagery, but it also felt really familiar because it was Islamic textiles. And I had grown up in a New England Catholic home. And so they were filled with, all of these knockoffs from Sears, which was great. But also then kind of like making this alignment, being like, well, what place do these have in these settings? And why do they exist here? But just kind of like evolving my love for textiles and incorporating that into my work. And so that's kind of how I got involved with the print studio. Then I spent some time teaching, and then I moved back to Western Massachusetts in about 2016 from New York, where I spent a year or two there. And really just kind of dived into this body of work that I have now, and have spent a lot of time just working a lot of different art jobs, being artist assistants to a lot of different people. And I moved into a home with a bunch of artists who are, 3 times my age, 2 times my age at this point, and who have, spent their time establishing their careers as artists and knowing what aesthetics they're interested in, and are printmakers and painters and musicians. And so in terms of influences, I would have to agree with Emilio that I pull from experiences, and I pull from the people that surround me and bring light into experiences that I have. And I think I represent that in the narratives that I portray in my work. In terms of specific artists, I guess the earliest influence is to the Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston by my aunt, and being shown this John Singer Sargent painting right when you walk in, El Pueblo, and just being like floored by that. I remember being extremely young and just being like, that is so dramatic. Look at those dark. And how can you, not like that and be moved by that to some extent? And then just being like, wow, painting is so beautiful and seems exhausting. But that's great for them. And then I was like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And that's, another thing that just inspired me and nurtured me in a way. So yeah, that's me.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it was very interesting to hear just the diversity of experiences, life experiences, perspectives, influences. I think that's what makes art so wonderful and always changing. So thank you for kind of getting us started off with that. So we're going to shift to talk a little bit about the work in the show, Movement in Space, Works on Paper, and I'll change the order up a little bit here, but Holly, can I start with you? Talk a little bit about the work you've produced for the show. What are you hoping for the viewer to take away? What were you thinking about when you were making the work? Give us kind of a little deeper dive inside what was happening.
I work a lot with archetypes and mythology because I believe that it is often a metaphor for the levels in our lives that we can't really see in the everyday. This, of course, the series is titled Icarus. It is about a bird, you know, a man that, in my case, a woman who, you know, attaches wings to their back with wax, and then with a desire to reach the heat of the sun flies too close. And then the wax melts. And I think in many ways, I made these different images of these wing-like shapes as part of this whole notion of flight. During the pandemic, I was really interested in the notion of rebirth and redefining myself, and also renewal for society at large. I think, though, that when one strives in this way, there's a type of internal tension that occurs, and an internal pressure. And so the pieces are kind of very, some people describe my paintings on paper as nests, because there's so much of a microcosm of things that it's almost like looking at a microscope as you look into something, almost like looking into a pond. It is my personality to push things to the furthest possible place. In my work, I really push myself really, really hard. And I think that there's an intensity in the work, and I enjoy that. I'm not even sure it's a choice. I think I feel driven. And so, you know, there's just a little comment on the technical. Many people ask me, how do I make the work? What you see in the gallery is I start with graphite often and gouache. I will often paint botanical images. I like to start with images of coral reef or exotic fish. And then things get very abstract really quickly. And then I start layering the candle smoke, which is a way of obscuring the image. And then I erase back into it, because candle smoke is sort of a proxy for charcoal, though it's more elusive. And then I hand cut the drafting film and layer that. And that's where you see the wing-like shapes. This is one of the first series where I experimented with neon colored pencil. I like the way that the neon, I'd never, you know, I bought a big box of them and there were these neon pencils and they were quite amazing. So that's kind of how I got to that. And I see Ron Jansen on the call. He's a good friend of mine. So I want to shout out to Ron for joining us.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Holly. So it sounds like you say you like to push it. So have you flown too close to the sun a few times, would you say, in your art making?
Well, you know, the last show that I had was at Slate Contemporary, and I did in Oakland, California, and I did an 11-foot by 11-foot hand-drawn installation. And it was rolled out on my living room floor, and I basically couldn't even see how big it was going to be. I just didn't know, you know. I did the drawing on both sides, and, you know, it was kind of like one of those things like I was like, well, might work out. I don't know, you know. I think you just have to suspend disbelief, and I could have gotten burned, but the piece really worked out well. It's suspended in a very sort of elusive way that I really liked. But there's a lot of challenges, and I work in a place of unknowing and being comfortable with that not knowing. You know, I feel like when I was young, knowing the answer was really important. And then as you get older, you realize you don't even know what you're talking about. And maybe that's where the wisdom really comes in.
No, I think that's really powerful, and that their willingness to go into the unknown. I mean, there's safety. You can keep making the same work over and over again a little bit differently and feel good about it. People may buy it, but, you know, and not every artist is willing to go there. So, you know, it's great to hear that, great to hear that perspective. So thank you. Emilio, you want to share a little bit about the work in the show? You know, kind of what was going through your head as you were making the work? What do you want viewers to take away? Anything else you'd like to share about technique or whatnot? Fire away.
So, I am a painter by training, but I don't usually paint. I've been working a lot with assemblage and installation, when the pandemic started, because I was so isolated, like I didn't have any other human being around uh, for at least a month and a half. I started going to to a skate park, and because I started like realizing that there was a lot of emotions that I had not dealt with, and I tried to make myself face them by exposing myself, like being on that. Like I would leave. I started thinking a lot about homelessness and then about space, about like I had a roof at that day, but I didn't know if I was going to be able to pay the rent next day because nobody knew when we were going back to work. And that stress like drove me to think about myself as homeless and or possible. And I forced myself to go every day at 8 a.m. to the park without having had breakfast or anything. Just like be there and be exposed to the people walking by. And I started just like being on this lot, and there was a pile of bricks, and I started playing with these bricks, which like for 2 3 weeks ended up being this installation that I made. But because of that, I started thinking that I was very concerned, so concerned about home that it could be reduced to things like trying to take the layers off and see what was left. And what was left was space. Is that idea that I felt that constricted on this house by myself, and that sense of space was not just mine. It was the feeling of being stuck in this tiny place or whatever space. Like, it didn't matter. It felt just like we were just there. Uh, I knew that it wasn't just mine, so I started contacting people that I knew and asking them to just take a picture with putting yourself in the smallest space possible, and they would try to contort and try to get themselves small and take a picture and send it to me, and started just working these drawings out of a need to process what was going on. So I didn't have necessarily a view, a foresight of what did I want the viewer to get out. And even now afterwards, my work is a lot of whatever is that fits you, because it's your personality and your experiences that determine how you understand any event. uh, the pandemic gave a lot of people chance to connect in a very special way, but other people just suffered the whole thing. And so that different range of understanding and experiences about one single event, I try to always have in my work as a driving, like that's my interest, that randomness of what people actually get uh, has the opportunity to play itself. And and I like people. I think Dana is the first person that came to me and said something specific. And when she showed interest, like, hey, I saw your work on this website, and so we started talking. And I'm like, huh? So you perceive them as beautiful? Like that was an idea that had never crossed my mind. I didn't think of beauty in any case. I do have a compulsion to work a lot. So that I told Dana on that first talk is that I still consider them as work, as a failure, because the interest to just put my feelings out was superseded and overwhelmed by my compulsion to technically work things until my utmost capacity of sorts. And it's still that push and pull, and so I still feel that these pieces are a process, and that is not done or complete. And I hope that changes in me. But on the meantime, I want people to be themselves and take the work as themselves, whatever that means. Like I have no, like if the work makes you happy, then I'm happy with that result. But if it makes you melancholic, I want you to think about that sense of melancholy, and because that's maybe what you need to grow. In my case, the making of the work is what helps me grow, but uh, everyone else has their own story, and that's it.
Um, Emilio, thank you. That's great. I mean, the work is fascinating, and always interesting to hear that. Yeah, let the viewer decide what to make of it. Uh, Again, thanks for very honest sharing of what kind of where you were and what kind of brought the work out of you. So that's great. Kevin, talk a little bit about the work in the show. What were you kind of thinking about as you're making it? What are you hoping viewers are going to take away? What do you want to share with everybody? You're muted. There you go.
I'm muted and I think I'm a little laggy, so my apologies if my computer's acting up. Let's see, I started, I think I mentioned I moved back here about 5 years ago and I started to make this work. It is all etchings. I primarily work in etchings. It's kind of, I like to think of each of these pieces as a journal entry to some extent. Most of the work that is in this show is from one of 3 portfolios or bodies of work that I've created over the past 5 years. And specifically, most of them are from the initial one that I first started to work on. And it's kind of, I like to think that it's primarily about community in a lot of ways. And, moving back here and identifying as kind of a queer individual and a gay male that's known that since, I was very young, but always navigating spaces that I've kind of grown up in and with the community that I've always known, and not feeling necessarily safe about certain things until I returned and started to make this work, and kind of separated myself from the area in which I originally had grown up in. I like to think of this work as type of sorts of journal entries. I think I mentioned that, but as sorts of compartmentalization in a way. So based off of lived experiences that I've had, whether it be moments where I've interacted with somebody who wasn't super pleased with my sexuality, or moments with a lover, moments with family members who weren't necessarily pleased with me for any type of reason. And each of those is kind of, there's an ambiguousness to each of the works. There's not a lot of distinguishing factors to the figures that I have or use. And I think that's left to both protect the person that they're representing, but also to allow people to make their own assumptions about what the specific narrative is. Yeah, so in a way, they are just kind of like this raw emotional thing from my insides that mean a lot specifically to me, but can be translated outward to whoever wants to take them in. Yeah.
Yeah, Matt, yeah, that's great. Again, thanks for being honest. I mean, it's interesting again to hear again the different perspectives and kind of what's inspiring the work. So Kevin, thanks for sharing that.
Definitely.
Elizabeth, we're going to kind of finish up with you in that section, and maybe we'll open it up for some questions from some of the people who are joining us tonight. Tell us a little bit about the work in the show. What we're thinking about making the work. What is it maybe you'd like people to take away?
So if I'm being incredibly honest, it came about as a total fluke. I am the worst at documenting my work because my background is as a sculptor, and I kept borrowing all these digital cameras, and each one has a slightly different series of settings. And I finally thought I need to buy a camera. And so I was literally just trying to get to know this camera and started taking these photographs. I mean, I didn't like these paper sculptures. I didn't do it. This is the light coming out of my studio. And I became really fascinated with the way that, the light would just pick up on the rim of something and become like this drawing in space. And then I became even more fascinated by the fact that I wasn't altering these images. I wasn't lighting them. I wasn't cropping them. I wasn't doing anything to them. I was just recording this absolute moment in time. And yet I would go back to the studio and try to figure out which sculpture went with which photograph. And I sometimes couldn't find it. Or actually even in the group of work that's at the gallery, originally I had put down that there were 4 corresponding sculptures. And then I went to the studio to get them and I couldn't find them, and realized that I had attributed one of the photographs to a sculpture that it wasn't of. And in fact, there were only 3. So I became really interested in that, but I kept thinking that this was all sort of, coming out of left field. And then I sort of backed up and remembered that, like, I've always sort of worked with something that's flat. It used to be expandable metal lath that I covered, and I would put a cut and I'd create a fold and tie it off with baling wire. And then I'd build up these layers of plaster. And suddenly I realized that I was doing the exact same thing with the paper. So the paper was also another total fluke. I was working on this 12-foot drawing, and it's Williamsburg, and it's really humid, and it was buckling, and the buckles were more present than the drawing. And I called this paper conservationist, who at one point finally told me I just needed to embrace its paperness. But in an attempt to get the paper to stay taut, I thought, I know, I'll just put archival Tyvek on the back of it, because that'll keep it from buckling, which it didn't, at that scale and with our humidity. So then I had this huge piece of paper around with this, backing, and I just one day, literally out of complete frustration, just started cutting, and then suddenly realized that I was making sculptures in the exact same way I'd been doing most of my life, only it was in a different material. And I became really interested in how, just by having the Tyvek backing, created a different kind of surface tension, and so that when you see the paper sculptures up close, they become almost porous, like skin. And I liked the fact that they were just paper. They were really modest materials, and it was just string. And that's literally all there is to them. And yet, in these photographs, if I'm doing what I hope I'm doing, I'm creating these sort of spaces that you can like fall into and be absorbed into. And so that they're not about telling someone something as much as I hope that they're about creating this space that you can just enter and is ordered and calm and just someplace that you slip into. So sort of where they came from.
That's great. Calm is, it's funny, that as soon as you said, that's really what the pieces felt like to me when you were looking at them. There was just a certain quietness and yet wholeness to the pieces. So, but thanks for being honest and saying it was a fluke.
But I mean, that's the interesting thing though, right? Because it was a fluke, and I thought it was coming out of left field, but yet the more I reflect on it, I can see all these relationships to, everything I've been doing for the last like 35, 40 years.
Well, that also that gives you the experience to know what to do with it when it is a fluke too. So yeah. How do you make the most of those unexpected opportunities? So, I mean, this is really interesting because four very different perspectives on where your work comes from, what you were thinking, what you want the audience to take away. I mean, just fascinating. Obviously, the work itself is diverse. So great to hear that. Great to hear that experience. What I'd like to do, we do have a few audience members on Zoom, and I think somebody in the gallery as well, but also to the other artists. If anybody has a question that they want to ask one of the artists, including the artists or folks in the room, I'm happy to throw it open to some Q&A here. We've got a few minutes left, about 15 minutes. Anybody want to throw something out to one of the artists? I'm not seeing any hands go up. Any hands? Okay, yep, there we go. Elizabeth, we've got our first question.
Holly, I was really curious about, because I saw on your website that you also have done photographs of some of these installations that you are viewing as existing as photographs. And what I thought was really beautiful about them is they have the same kind of sensibility in a way as what I see as the sculptural work, as well as these pieces in the exhibition. But I was wondering how you thought about those photographs in relation to this work, because there's also that sense of layering in it, and how you see those as sitting within kind of your body of work overall.
Thank you for the question. I mean, I think you've brought up something that I don't think I really picked up on until now, which is that early, so the photographs were of very large fiber-based installations. They were suspended polyester tulle that I ran through a sewing machine with hundreds of yards of thread that was light reflective. And, you know, this is kind of the way I always work. I have, my studio is west facing and there's a window. And so the light was coming in. And, you know, it's interesting because my husband had a lot of experience as a filmmaker, and he would come in and look at the light and be like, oh, wow, you know. And I was like, huh, you know, I had done some photography, medium format photography, but hadn't done that for a while. And I had a cell phone. And it's really first started with documenting my process, but then starting to feel like those photographs had their own sort of standalone life. Much of the way that I work is by sensing and just sort of responding to that. It's very iterative, I would say.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful relationship between all of the different bodies of work. I mean, the way that they weave together, you know, and that, I don't want to monopolize this. I was going to say that there was also something that I thought was interesting in Kevin's work, was the way that the etchings feel like they're actually woven together, the way that your line sensibility, you know, you talked about like fabrics and things like that, but the prints themselves begin to feel like fabrics in the way they're composed.
Totally, thank you. Yeah, it's funny because recently I've been thinking about ways in which I can work outside of printmaking in a strange way. And I always come back to the idea of making physical things, or even starting by making prints of, you know, not textiles in space, but necessarily just textiles in general. And I started to do that, and I think a lot more of my recent work, where I'm making these either towels or blankets where there's a lot of just like personal imagery on them, to say the least, with a lot of different stylized objects, whether it be phalluses or hot dogs or chickens with their heads chopped off for some reason. But just something to contradict the norm that I learned to reference these textiles in. And so it's something that I always think about. So for you to think of them as, I guess, like a tangible object is interesting. Thank you for that comment.
And if I could make just one more comment, and I promise I won't say anything else. Emilio, I wanted to say the thing that I really appreciated about this series that you have in the exhibition is that sense of compression and that sense of, I think, stifling containment that we've all felt. And it didn't dawn on me until just now when I was looking at like the boxes that we're all sitting here. I mean, they're essentially that proportion. I didn't realize that when I was looking at them, as much as I felt that. I don't know about other people, but I feel like this sense of tension when I sit here and Zoom, even as I try to, like, you know, I got myself a chair that I can move around in and stuff like that. And still there's this oddness that we feel. And those drawings really convey that sense of, I think, what we've been going through physically, you know, in a really interesting way.
I have a question. For probably each of the artists, I'm getting a little bit of feedback here, but I'm going to barrel through. So I was hoping that each one of you could maybe talk a little bit about either what surprised you most about becoming an artist or being an artist, or if you want to, you can talk about if you have any advice to any of the new artists, the emerging artists out there.
I'll start. I think that, you know, I think that the biggest surprise about being an artist, of course, is when you go to art school and then you get out and it's like the end. You have student loan debt and you've got to make a living, which, you know, I think we all navigate that in different ways. But I would say that my advice to young artists is don't get a bunch of student loan debt. You know, don't do that. Make sure that you take care of your life, that you make sure you have access to healthcare, that you have access to mental health care, and that first and foremost, you take care of your body. I think that these are lessons that many of us didn't learn sometimes. And I think that, you know, I think making a living and having a life are two different things. Your artistic practice, I think it's important that people realize it is a part of you. Develop a studio life, even if there are days when you don't feel like you can get more than 20 minutes in because you're dog tired from being in some dead-end job, but do it and continue to do it as an act of love and commitment to yourself your whole life. It's not a sprint. It's a long race, and it's about developing a language and remember to nourish your relationships. And remember to build community. I would say that the number one thing that artists need to do is build community and rely on each other. And that's where really the opportunities come from, what we build for ourselves. Sharing, being collaborative doesn't make the pie smaller, it makes the pie larger for everyone. So that would be my advice.
I wanted to say that I've learned on the not cool way that art is not a career, it's a lifestyle. It's as you mentioned, a commitment. And if you don't take it, art started working for me when I made it a point to almost make office hours. Spaces in my life that were separated for that, and I had to be there doing things that were related to it. Before that, I was just, as Holly was talking, and the part of not having healthcare or not nurturing my relationships and not doing that. It is a universe in which the things that is very conflicted even to go to art school, because there is a part that you really benefit from going to art school, but nobody teaches you how to be brave. That you have to do it by yourself. And that is the biggest conflict that I think everyone finds when they get out of art school, that you know all these techniques, but the business part is about being brave, putting yourself out there, reaching out to people, knowing about reject. You're gonna have to deal with rejection like all the freaking time. And you're basically alone. Well, most of the people are alone in their environments when they decide to become artists, so they don't have a good support system. Because even when people love you, they don't know what to tell you, how to work things out. And so that's why community has made so much, because it gives you a space in which the smaller opportunities that seem from any perspective meaningless become the cornerstone in which you actually can build a system.
I would say I agree with what both Emilio and Holly have said, but I also think that one has to be willing to take risks and be willing to fail, which I think is a really hard thing. And, you know, particularly right when you come out of school too. I mean, it's hard to do when you're in school because you're anticipating grades and all these things. And what is going to move forward is if you're willing and daring enough to risk it all. And then I think the other thing is curiosity. I think it's really easy to lose sight of it, or to, Peter, I think you said it earlier this evening, you know, where you just play safe and you just do the same thing over and over again. I mean, I think you've got to be willing to go up to the very edge and push it further. But I think it's crucial to remain curious about the world around you always.
And just to tack on, I think everything that Holly said was really important and really true, and I 200% support it. And same with everybody else. I think the most people that I know who are, you know, living off of their art or just like existing and can afford to do that, have, you know, maxed out credit cards and like found a way to profit off of all of this stuff, in which they're like, well, I risked it all, but it's like, yeah, you still had a house that somebody was paying for and doing all of that stuff, and that's really great. But we don't all have that, and that's not accessible to everybody. And healthcare is super important, and mental health is really important. And, you know, the idea of working a job where you're 9 to 5 every day, and then you go home and you're so exhausted and you got to make lunch for tomorrow and you'd like to, call your mom or spend time with your significant other. That's all very valid. So taking that break too, taking a month to 6 months to a year and saying, like, this is something that I need to revisit because existing is really important to me, and knowing that that's okay is fine, because art will be there, but just know that you need to return to it and always have it in the back of your mind. But yeah, knowing that you have it's a weird thing to think about, that you have this thing that you're driven to, not because you necessarily want to make money. It's something that nourishes you in so many different ways and feels like you can't live life without making it. But then you're like, oh, how do I profit off of this thing? It feels gross. It feels like that is something that is ingrained into a lot of us. And I don't think that's why a lot of us do this. But if you're able to do both of those things and wear both of those hats, that's really, that's great. I think I would love to take a class with you. Yeah, and that's it.
Great insights from everybody. Thank you. I mean, definitely that's that risk reward. Take care of yourself. Produce work that makes you feel good. That's a lot. That's a lot to keep in balance. So kudos to the four of you and all the other artists who find a way to continue to make it work. Dana, do you have any other final thoughts here, or anybody else want to ask a question or get some remarks in before we finish up?
This is for Kevin. I don't know. Actually, I was at Z-Maze about 5 years ago, 4 years ago. Anyway, you probably don't remember. But anyway, looking at your print and seeing the figures on top of the, I don't want to say on top, but it's almost like they're intertwined with the textile, and the pattern of the figures seem to, really, you might have talked about this already. I have to apologize. Some of it I couldn't really understand, but because I can't hear as well. Anyway, it really was what really struck me is the pattern of the figures and the pattern of the textiles, and the presence of both of those were very cohesive and sort of Escher-like, which might be a reach, but it's almost like the figures could come out of those textiles. I don't know if that's a question or a statement. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that.
I think from what I heard, I'm sorry, I didn't realize halfway. I think I heard ZMAs and then I heard the rest of your question. So I'm assuming it's directed towards me. But yeah, I think the forms that I use and the perspectives that I use, I try to make pretty dynamic. So I guess I never like to keep things within obviously a specific parameter of the plate or the print or the, what I have to work with. I think that obviously a lot of people would agree with me that it can make it uninteresting. But incorporating them and just like acknowledging that the textiles that we wear and that the body could become, just another stylized form within the carpet is a great way to look at it. And thank you for perceiving that. I'm so sorry, what was your name again?
It's Gretchen Durst Jacobs. I was at Z-Maze when, I don't know if this is correct to say, but when Trump got elected. And I think you greeted people at the door. I hope this was you. And it's something like free hugs or something, because we were all like totally.
I'm so sorry, I really can't hear what you're saying, but
pretty,
I believe we've probably met at ZMAs, which is great. I'm happy that.
Yeah. Anyway, I was in the big studio for I think about 2-3 weeks.
I think that's all the questions we have on in the gallery.
Mhm.
Dana, is there a question you want to reiterate for Kevin? It was a little hard to hear.
Was there a question? I'm sorry. What did you say, Peter?
I was just wondering, is there a question? I think it was a little hard to hear. Question.
We're having some technical difficulties on our end here, so I think we have exhausted the questions in the gallery. I didn't know if anybody in Zoom had any other questions. If not, we could probably wrap it up.
I really appreciate being here tonight, and it was so great to hear from all the artists.
I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you to you all. This was really an interesting and elucidating conversation. So thank you.
Well, thanks for being here. Ron, thanks for being here as well.
Peter, thank you for hosting, and Dana, thank you for the show.
Victoria, good to see you. You have any questions, Victoria?
No, I'm from Argentina, so I'm just listening.
Well, you can have, you're allowed to have questions in Argentina too.
No. No, I'm trying to understand everything, and I didn't speak English for a long time, so I understand a little bit, but I really love what I hear. And I know Kevin works, so I wanted to hear that, and I'm going to look the other artist, how you say that, to see the work and know everything.
Great. Thank you for coming. It's so good to see you.
Yes. I miss to be in CMAs and work there.
I know. It's good to be there.
Yes, it's very cold here, so I was in another, how you say, with a scarf, how you say that?
Yep, it's bundled up. You're doing the thing. Yeah.
And it's very cold here. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in. Peter, thank you for hosting, and Dana, thank you for having my work in there as well.
I love to hear to you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm unfortunately going to have to sign off, but I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of the evening.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks for.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to everyone. This was actually a really wonderful evening.
I want to say thank you to all the artists and everybody who participated. We just really appreciate it. I feel like everybody was really generous and their answers, and I can't say it enough. We are just thrilled to be able to have your artwork here in the gallery. So thank you for participating. I'm so thrilled to have this. I have every intention of being able to put this out for everybody to see it on social media. So stay tuned for that. But again, thanks everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dana.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.